Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Design Systems Community Meetup. This is number 12 and our third this year in 2021. We are your co-hosts for the DSCC Toronto chapter, and let's get started. And today's special meetup is about Inside Design Systems. The design system's name is Workbench, and we have guests from Gusto. And today's date is November 30th, 2021. If you're watching this recorded, that is the date this took place. Now, next slide, we're going to begin our meetups like we always do with a land acknowledgement. The land I am standing on today is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. I also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty, signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. And as usual, we have our code of conduct. So if you're in the YouTube comments or on Slido, please be respectful of each other, keep things legal, play nice, uphold the conduct, which is available on our website, designsystems.community, and protect your privacy. Watch what you post. And we are your co-hosts for today, including myself. My name is Enrico Winter Ready Sacchetti, and this is my co-host Varun.
Hey everyone, I'm Varun. I'm doing the product at Design Systems Community, and also I work at Unity. But I'll be facilitating today, and excited to meet you all.
We also have in the background behind the scenes Lucy List. She will be live tweeting for us today. And last but not least, here she is, Donna.
Hi everyone, I am a Toronto chapter lead, yay, and I'm also the design lead for the design systems at TELUS Digital.
Awesome. And we're here today to make sure all of you have a nice, comfortable time. And one of the way we do that is with our values. We have 7 values, very important. We have accessibility, diversity and inclusivity, community and sharing, a customer focus, collaborative working, and we bridge content, design, and code, which is unique to design systems community and all the very diverse set of practices and roles that we all have among our audience members. And last but not least, fun. It's really nice that we get to host these meetups for free and on YouTube and in a way that's available as much as we possibly can manage. And I think that's really great. Past our values, we have our sponsors. Thank you very much to Wrangle and to Scotiabank for being our long-term sponsors for the past while. And of course, thank you to our volunteers. We'll never forget you in the past, present, and future. Also, join us today on Slido. As some of you noticed, you have YouTube comments enabled, but if you prefer to be anonymous, we have an option for you. In the YouTube description down below, we have a hyperlink to Slido. Click that and it'll take you to the Slido website where you can post questions and answers to our guests. Our guests are going to be presenting soon, but afterwards we'll have a live question and answers panel, and we will very likely read out your questions to them. So please try out Slido, try the link below or the link on screen, which is sli.do/826036. I'm sure the hyperlink might be easier. And let's start with a little icebreaker. Which city are you joining from? So if you go to Slido right now, in that link below, you'll see a live question asking you where you're from. Let's have a quick look to see what some of the answers are. Here it comes. Okay. We have one from Croatia. Fantastic. Let's see if we can get 2 or 3 more responses. The link is in the YouTube description below. You can access this on your phones, on your tablets, on your computers, anything with a screen. Minnesota, Minneapolis. Nice to meet you. And Czech Republic. One of our Design Systems Community chapters is in Czechia. Glad to have you back. And here comes a few more. We have Denver, Toronto, Las Vegas, and 2 Torontos. You know, there's a Toronto in the United States too. It could be that Toronto. You never know. Kitchener, that's nearby. Chicago. And Chicago is now in the spotlight. Thank you all for joining from your various cities. And let's get to the fun part. Our agenda for today. So housekeeping has ended, which means Workbench will soon begin. I'm going to bring our guests onto the screen soon. And after they go over Workbench for a few minutes, we're going to have a panel discussion led by Varun and Donna. And we'll have a chance to read out your questions, both on the YouTube comments you can ask there, or within the Slido Q&A. So check out the Q&A section on Slido, and you can ask anonymously as well. After that, at around 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have our closing remarks. And without further ado, let me introduce our guests. We have Derek.
Hello, everybody.
Derek. And we have Ben.
Hey.
Hello, Ben. So Derek and Ben are going to walk you through Gusto, and why take up another second? It's all up to you now. See you soon.
Thank you, Enrico, Varun, Donna, and Lucy for the great introduction and putting everything together. And thank you all for joining. We're very, very thankful to be here and share with you our experience at Gusto, and specifically our design system called Workbench. Just to give a little bit of intro to who we are, I'm Derek. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a designer on the design systems team. I'm located in Maryland, hence the crab emoji, though I do not eat crabs. And for those who don't know, crabs are really popular to eat around here in the Maryland Eastern Shore area. And I don't eat them because I'm vegetarian. And I'll let Ben introduce himself.
Hey, everyone, I'm Ben. Pronouns are he and him. I'm also a designer on the design systems team at Gusto. And I'm currently in San Francisco. Been here for about a year, but previously spent a lot of time in Chicago. So there's a lot of people from Chicago. So hi.
That's pretty cool. Ben's fan club is here. That's why Chicago is so big. Okay, let's get started. Just to give a little bit of context about the company that we're working for. It's called Gusto. And Gusto is the HR operating system, we like to call it. We build tools for mostly small businesses and medium-sized businesses to onboard, to hire, to pay, to insure, and to give their employees benefits, and to manage everything around HR. The entire org in Gusto is about over 2,200 people now. And today we're going to talk about how we guide and communicate our team members on the design team, engineering team, and how to use our design system. So just a little bit about Workbench. We support about 45 designers, and as that's growing, we support a little bit more people in the entire design organization, including some leads as well as researchers and content writers. We support over 400 engineers, and our system exists in a few different forms. It exists in the Figma library and UI kit, so assets for designers. It exists as a component library, as React components for engineers, and it exists as a documentation website, which provides guidance on how to use the design assets, the React assets, as well as some guidance for researchers and content writers. On there, we also talk a little bit about our accessibility and how we build that into each of our components. I'll start kind of backwards in what I just shared in Workbench's different forms. So the first is the documentation site. Like I mentioned, this houses like all the different design language and docs and tokens. We show a lot of different examples of patterns. You can see here on the left, foundations, components, again, content. We provide some getting started resources and other resources as well. And then we share a little bit about where we're going, what we're working on, and how things are evolving within Workbench. Continuing backwards, talk about a little bit about the component library for engineers. We have about 40-ish components currently available. Again, all built in React. We are continuing to build more and more as our product is growing. And these components are specifically built to build the Gusto web products. We do have native mobile products, but Workbench is not yet supporting that front. And what we'll focus a lot on today is more about the design assets that we provide, and again, how we communicate our guidance on Workbench to different folks throughout the system. So this is a little bit about our Figma asset library. Something that we try to do when building tools for designers is make sure that they're one-to-one visual translations of our code components. So whatever an engineer might have available, we want to make sure that the naming, that the way that it's structured, and the way that it's used and works in Figma is as much like the coded example as possible, so that when designers are communicating and working and collaborating with engineers, that they're able to communicate seamlessly and know what each other are talking about, and therefore build products more efficiently. We also build all of our Figma stuff with variants and auto layout for ease of use and ease of maintaining on our side. Of course, where that is appropriate, we, as many people, can find ourselves getting carried away sometimes with variants and auto layout, and we're constantly evolving. It's never a done process. We always want to continue to learn and build as Figma grows, as our designers change, and as we learn more too. And the how we've built this is as an asset library, as components in Figma that is then consumed into a visual UI kit. So if somebody wants to view things a little bit more visually, they might not know exactly what component they're looking for, they can do that within the UI kit. We organize our components, our patterns, all of our elements into these sections for easier visual digestion using emojis. You can see we have patterns, templates, things that are in lab, components and foundations and utilities. These are all different parts of how our documentation site, as you saw before, is organized. Again, we want to make sure that how we're communicating things in one place is as similar as possible in another place. It can't always be the same, but we try to make sure that we're not saying different things in different places. Just talk a little bit about these foundational elements are for us are used to build our components, which are used to build patterns, which are used to build templates. And this lab section that we see at the bottom is kind of our work in progress place. We're saying, hey, these things are in progress. We're working on them. They're not completely ready to be published and into our core library, but you can start using them. And it helps us to learn how can we make these things better. We can get people to start using them and testing them, building them into the product. Both in our assets themselves, the components like we see here, this toggle tip, and the UI kit and these like more visual pages and how to use a component, we provide links to our documentation. We want to enable people to reach the assets and the resources that they need, the guidance around how to use whatever they're trying to use wherever they can. We want to always guide to that single source of truth, that documentation site. We don't put a lot of documentation or guidance inside of Figma itself because we want to guide everyone to that single source of truth. So we, in the UI kit, use this link up here to show that, let's see if this will highlight for us. There we go. That little highlighted there, link to, they can click this to go see the documentation for a form. Or if they bring in this toggle tip again, they can use the link that's within Figma to go to the documentation for that component. So we're always trying to meet designers where they are, how they're using components. They all use things differently. There's no wrong way to use something. We just want to make sure that we are able to use the tools that we have available to meet them where they are. And on that note of meeting them where they are, a lot of times designers are thinking of things differently. They're thinking of an input as an input or a field, or maybe they're thinking specifically of trying to find the text area. And whatever they search, we want them to be able to find what they're looking for. So we build our components in that way, and we use these the description field in the Figma component to help them find what they're looking for. And we always tell them that if you think of something differently, it's very easy for us to alter the other names for a component, so that if you think of an input as a typey thingy, that's okay. Let us know. We can put that into the description so that you can search typey thing and you'll find the component you're looking for. We also imply some of our guidance through the use of emojis, similarly to how we used emojis in the organization of all of our different components and patterns and such. We use these little pencil emojis to let them know, hey, this is something that you need to edit. And so we work with the writers on our team to know like, hey, what things should people be editing? We also work with them to help provide some placeholder copies. So when you bring in an input or something, any other component, that it starts with the text that is to guide them in how they might write that component. And then, of course, you can see here every layer is named. We just try to provide as much understanding of how something is structured and built, and what things are what layers are which in through layer naming. So let's talk a little bit about onboarding and education. When a new designer joins our team, we have some different things that we do. We do an intro to Workbench. It's usually a one-on-one pairing where we show them how to get started, how to use Figma, how to use Workbench Figma, how to access our documentation site, and anything that they might have questions about. We also do some different courses like Design Systems 101 for engineers and other folks who might not even know what a design system is. We, of course, have a design systems channel in Slack that we always want people to be able to interact with us with and ask any questions. Let them know that if there's something you don't know, it's okay. Let us know. We're here to help. So one thing that we do after these workshops is we send people an anonymous survey built in Airtable to gather some feedback and see, like, do you feel prepared to use this system now after this workshop? Is there anything that we can do better to help you understand or help new people understand as well? Touching back on the documentation site and the single source of truth for all of our docs, we also provide different ways of learning. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, this getting started section, we have one for like an overview, designers and engineers as well. And in some of these sections, we create these Loom videos that are like under 5 minutes and really quick, easy ways to learn something. It might be, again, if you miss something from the workshop or forget something, you can go back here and find the same information that we talk about in those through these videos. So again, trying to meet everyone where they are in their preferred way of learning, whether it's a one-on-one workshop or it's through Slack or it's through a visual video. And on that note as well, we create these Loom videos for components individually as well. So if we want to show people how do you use a table in Figma, tables are a very, very in-depth, detailed component with lots of nested components, lots of variants, and things that you can change. And so we create these videos to help them understand how to use each component as well. On the documentation side, is on each of the different pages for the components, we also provide some anatomy to help them understand how did we build this component. If you're talking to an engineer on the footer of a dialogue or the close action or whatever it might be, we want them to make sure they're communicating the same way. So we provide this to help them see, like, how was something built? How is it built in Figma as well as in code? And how can we communicate to each other? Back to the UI kit, we also use these helpers up top to let people know, like, hey, if you're trying to use the actions pattern, that if you're trying to use it in a form or a dialogue like we just saw, they're actually already built into it. So you might be looking for that pattern or component. But we provide, just a few examples. Again, not too much guidance in the UI kit because we want to point them back to the documentation site, but just enough to help them know where they might be wanting to look instead. Another thing that we do here is a little bit of versioning. We're looking more into some other ways of versioning our components and our process, but a quick one is just like, when was this last updated? And we can put that here and people can see, like, oh, I've used this. I need to update my Figma file. We use Airtable, like you saw before, for surveys, but also for organizing our tasks. All the things that we're working on, we want to make sure that, like, what components are in progress. How are they in progress? Are they design in progress or engine progress or docs in progress? And we can use this to help prioritize our own projects and know, excuse me, what we should be doing next, what's ready for engineering, what might be in our backlog, or what might be blocked if anything is. And so this is really just for our design systems team, for us to communicate internally. So it has a bit more information in it, like when we might plan to do it or its priority or something like that. But we also use the Airtable API to connect to our documentation site, again, our single source of truth, to communicate out to other folks within the org. What are we working on? We want them to also know what's coming up, what's in progress, and when was something last updated. So we share that on the documentation site as well. Another way that we use Airtable is to initiate our contribution process. We have our understanding of process of how we find a component to build, how we go through the entire process from design to engineering to docs and releasing. And we have parts of our process that we want to enable people to contribute to if they want to. Sometimes only a designer wants to contribute. Sometimes it's just an engineer. And sometimes it's an entire team. And so we want to enable ways for anyone to contribute at any time and however much they might want. So the first step of that is to fill out this form to help us understand what is it that needs to be built and be contributed to Workbench. So that's one thing you can use this form for. Another thing, you could report a bug in Figma. We tell people all the time we're human. We make mistakes. Please let us know how we can fix something or improve something that we've built for you. Or maybe they want to request a new icon. But again, the contribution process is really what a lot of this is for. That's that first step to get people to let us know what is it that you're working on that you think might need to be a component and built into Workbench. We go through then a validation phase to not determine whether we want to do something or not, but just to make sure that other people might also be thinking about this component and how that helps us to prioritize how we might add it back to that Airtable list of what should be coming up next. Then we work through a design proposal, and there's some other steps of the contribution process as well. So touch a little bit more on the things that we offer people, specifically in the design team. There are a couple different office hours that you can come and ask any questions about, like, hey, how do I use auto layout in this way in Figma? Or there's a more structured design system office hours where it's our entire team, and usually we have a designer, maybe an engineer, and a product manager come to talk about something that they're working on. It's a little bit more built out. We also do weekly updates on the first day of the week. We share with people a little bit of what we looked at as far as what are we working on, what's new this week, if anything. Are there any announcements? And then we do monthly newsletters that kind of consolidates all of those things for the whole month. And then we also do a midweek Did You Know? It's kind of a thing that we put together to help continue education and the relationships with designers. So we offer things like, did you know that buttons and links are technically different and they should be used in different ways? Or did you know that we offered some new spacing guidelines, and here's a link to that on the documentation site. So different little tips that we can help guide people in. To kind of touch back on how content fits into our design system, we have this Workbench content template. So we pair with the content writers and to help designers to know how should I be writing something? How should I be working with a writer? And what are all the things I need to think about? And the content writers have also started to implement the midweek Did You Know for content. So they might say, did you know that we use a sentence case for most things? Or when should I use something else? So it's been really, really helpful to continue education to a lot of different people. Let's talk a little bit about how we measure the health of our system. The easiest, quickest way is we put this little link at the bottom of every page on our Workbench doc site, and it just enables people to say, like, yes, this was helpful, or no, it wasn't helpful, and they give us a little bit of feedback. This uses the Airtable API as well, so we can understand what's coming through and be able to organize that and know how we can improve this website and these different pages. We've also built a Google Data Studio dashboard that takes in Google Analytics, some analytics from Datadog, Figma, Full Story, and some custom spreadsheets we put together as well. And we use this really to communicate out to bi-monthly like presentation to like leaders across the organization to let them know like, hey, how are we doing? What's our progress? And then we also anonymously track interactions on our doc site to understand like how are consumers using our docs? How are they navigating around? What are they trying to find or go to? And this can help us understand how we can improve navigation around our doc site. And that's it. There's plenty more, but that's it for this. So we're excited to hopefully talk through some questions as well. And you can follow myself and Ben on Twitter. You can also go check out our doc site. It is a work in progress, but it is technically public. So feel free to check it out, workbench.gusto.com. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben and Derek. That was really comprehensive and really easy to understand. So thank you for that. Just before we get started with the panel and the questions that Donna and I are going to facilitate, I just want to give the audience a reminder that we are using Slido for questions and answers from the audience. So I know a bunch of you are asking questions on YouTube, which is fantastic. We're probably going to move them to Slido just so that folks can like vote in to those questions, and we can use that as a measure of priority when we get to that section. All right, let's get started. How are you doing, Ben and Derek?
Doing well. Was parched, but I got some water.
A lot of talking.
Good stuff. One thing that I really want to start off with is I really liked your documentation site. Is it like a self-built site, or is it on a specific platform? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So yeah, it's a custom Gatsby setup that we did. So yeah, there's a number of plugins, and we have some custom configurations in there, so we can show our code and have some additional tools on top of that.
Awesome. And how easy is like updating the documentation side? Is it like a CMS kind of system, or do you have to put in code for every update that you need to make?
Yeah, so we tried to make that like we started with it just being our team that was updating it. So then it was easy early on, but we started to move more into the content management side of things. We have it's capable of supporting Markdown, so that makes it easier for people to contribute if they don't want to write like HTML or JSX. They can outside contributors could do that from if they don't have experience in that. But we've also started integrating with Airtable, and we're looking into kind of more of a plugin for CMS. But the Airtable integrations have made it easy to do things like streaming our updates and other content directly from a table that anybody in the design organization can access.
Awesome, very cool. I think that's one of the best sites that I've seen, honestly. Like very neat, very easy to understand. So thanks for that. Let's go a bit into sort of the mix of your design system team. In addition to you two, what does your design system team look like?
Yeah. So yeah, there's the two of us. We're also hiring a new designer. We have a design lead who empowers both Ben and myself and this new designer. And then we have, three engineers now, three front-end engineers who focus again on creating like components and the documentation side. So pair a lot with Ben and myself to do those things. They have an engineering lead as well. And then we have a program manager who helps us stay on track and collaborate with external folks. And we are also having kind of like an overall design systems lead join us soon as well. So it almost 8, 9 people now?
I think we'll be at 9, yeah, by the end of the year.
Nice, good stuff. I think that really helps, and I think that was one of the questions that we got, on YouTube as well. So you did answer how large the team was. I guess, do you have a product manager? What's the difference between a product and a program manager in Gusto?
Yeah, we don't have a product manager, though I imagine kind of our design systems lead to join soon might take some of that. Like, hey, when I think of product manager for a design system, I'm thinking of in what direction should the design system go? How should we drive it? What new things should we working on? Our program manager, they're really, really great, but they help more with like our operational stuff. So if we need to set up some meetings with
very
external
processable.
folks, yeah, helps us a lot with understand our process and how we should be working to get things done and communicate that out and work with other people outside of our team.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been a PM product manager for our past design system team. So all the things that you're saying are essential for a team to drive to that vision and sort of bring, the customer's voice closer to the team. Cool. Just going within the Gusto mix, how many teams in Gusto use your design system, or squads, whatever your terminology is?
Yeah. I don't know exactly how many. I'd have to like look at that, but I to go back to like our numbers of how many people we have is there are over like 45 or so people, designers using the system. And then not every engineer we have over 400 engineers working on our product, but of course not all of them are exactly consuming the system. But we have these different pillars of the product, specifically around those different parts of the product that I talked about, payroll and benefits. And each of those have a team, which is usually made up of a design lead, a product manager, maybe a couple designers, and a couple engineers as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the organization changes a lot. So the teams restructure. It seems like it's hard to keep up with. Like to know like if a new team broke off, but they're kind of like focused on like the main missions of the company. So, but yeah, it's used throughout the entire product. There's not like for the entire web platform. There's not like a team that's not using it for within Gusto.
Okay, that's really helpful to know, and just to get a bit of context and how you support the folks within the organization. You mentioned web right now, Ben. Are there any other platforms that Gusto is on, like mobile?
Yeah, I mean, we support mobile web. The product does. There's not a companion app, but there are other apps that we have for other products under the umbrella of Gusto. And so we're working with those teams to kind of align on like the design language and bring that into Workbench on the doc site, and just having consistent guidelines and documentation practices.
Yeah. So that's interesting because how, as you're getting more into like all the different apps potentially, do you see that there's going to be like a design alignment between like this is a web experience and then this is an app experience?
I think we'd like to. Our native apps are still very new, and that team is still new and growing. Ideally, I think we would have not necessarily have the same look, same feel and products, as a native experience is very different than a web experience. But I think we would like to be able to support the mobile team and have kind of those two separate systems at some point.
Cool. Awesome. Well, as a product person, I'm always super interested in stakeholder buy-in. That's always been a big piece to make sure that alignment exists, just so that the system continues and grows as the organization scales. So what was like your process to get that stakeholder alignment for Gusto?
Well, we've been pretty fortunate that when both of us joined over the last year and a half, there already was a design system, and so there already was a lot of buy-in from leaders across the company. I think part of that comes from some of the leaders have worked at companies that have had large design system practices, so that's really great that they understand the work that we're doing. But I think that a lot of it is kind of you know coming through on our promises and making sure that we're making things, we're explaining the work that we're doing, making it clear, and then showing what the outcome is from that work, and just building that trust with them is really important for us.
Great. And do you have any specific sort of sessions or like reviews to continuously demonstrate like what the updates and the progress is with the stakeholders in addition to your users?
Yeah, so there's a I think it's every 6 weeks we do a cycle review with kind of the department heads and a variety of executives. We kind of talk about the objectives from the last period and what the results were, any metrics we have, anything that we didn't get to, and then we talk about our plan for the next 6 weeks. And so it's an open format where people can ask questions, they can leave comments, so we're able to kind of clarify and align properly on that and answer. If there's any concerns over like what we're prioritizing, we can address that before we actually start doing the work.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that you said that's every 6 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Roughly.
That's awesome. That's really cool. Brilliant. Cool. I'm going to move to sort of the users of Gusto and sort of your communication tactics. But really trying to understand, how do your users bring their challenges to the Gusto team? To the Workbench team.
When you say users, like consumers, like designers, engineers, and such?
Yeah, users of the design system, exactly what you mentioned.
Yeah. There's a couple of ways. Like we saw that form that people can fill out. We have it available again to meet those who want to fill out a form, but not everybody uses it. A lot of times we just make sure that we enable ourselves to be available to people. So a lot of times we'll have people book time through design system office hours. And a lot of times, most of the people I think are just reaching out through Slack, whether a direct message or in our design systems channel where anybody can join. We have our design systems like core channel where it's just our team, and then we have the other channel where anyone can ask any questions in there. So they bring a lot of different questions and challenges that they might be going through there, and we usually will respond there.
Yeah. I really like how you have different ways to reach out to the team. You have the form, you have the office hours. The other thing that I kind of want to ask would be like, if they're reaching out on Slack and you have forms and you have office hours, is there a way where you kind of have those discussions in an open meeting, or is it documented somewhere? Because you might be like answering the same questions over and over, or like trying to hit like the same issues. So how do you kind of share those things with other people, or how they share those things with inter-team type stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely find sometimes that we're answering similar questions. And I think to touch back, I think in the last question also was talking about what kind of challenges people are bringing. A lot of what people are bringing to these things are like, how do I use, X component? And so some of those things we find repeating themselves, mostly in the Slack, since probably 90% of our communications come through there. So we might link back to a conversation that we had before using, the link from Slack. And then I think with the midweek did you knows that are specifically for designers, we might start doing some engineering ones as well. If we find a common thread that somebody is commonly asking about, can I remove the underline from a link or something, we might share a midweek did you know to the entire team to remind them why we shouldn't remove underlines from links and point them to our documentation site on the links page. So I think like we might kind of use that platform.
Yeah. And I think for like recurring issues, we take a look at that, and we keep hearing the same question over and over again. You see there's, obviously, some sort of lapse in how we're communicating it or in our documentation. So we try to find ways to address that. One thing Derek's done that's been really helpful is he's created like Loom videos. I think he mentioned that in the presentation. But it's been really helpful to kind of see that. And our goal is to really have that for every component, how to use it in Figma. That way we can kind of point to that and we don't have to like manually address every question, on like how to use a variant or, should this be underlined? But yeah, those types of things are really useful for us.
Thank you. So again, in the realm of how your users are consuming your design system, so I really love the presentation on like really like showing us your organization and how like you're trying to have that alignment between like I'm going to build the Figma component as much as I can aligned with the code component. So I think that's really fair because then the designer knows like, oh, I want you to change this, property or that kind of thing with the developer. So how are with the single Figma file and it's shared to your users again as a library, how do people are people able to contribute back to that? And how do you manage, again, like, do they have their own library? Do they have their own file? And then give it and ladder up to you.
Yeah. Right now, our core library in Figma, people have view access, but they do not have edit access, just to help Mike manage, the maintenance of that. We have been thinking about some sort of community file to allow people to create their own components and put them in there to publish and allow other people to use. We find mostly right now that people might be creating reusable components in their own file for something that they might need. It might not be a Workbench like design system component, just a Figma component to make their process a bit easier. I think like where we find some challenges and where we're trying to figure out how do we do this well is how do we learn when somebody might need something that should actually be a new component. A lot of times we find people are trying to create something that should really just be using a different component. They might just not know of it, or they might not know that that's what it should be used for. And then making sure that some of the things that are very, very important to us when we're thinking about building a component are accessibility, both on the design side and in the engineering side. So I think it's going to require a lot more education to make sure that hey, here are our standards, here are our principles that we want to create things for, that we're optimizing for accessibility and inclusivity over a nice visual treatment. And so I think when we can find the balance between all those things, then we've created good design. But yeah, I think that's a challenge we're currently working through, is how do we get people more involved so we're not a bottleneck, but make sure that they're building things that meet our standards.
Yeah, and adding on to that, the other thing we have is we have a template that people can use to contribute. And so in that template, there's a number of questions that we kind of ask. It's a Figma file, and it has a couple different pages basically for the different stages of the project. So usually that kind of helps people answer the question of like, does this need to be a new component? Is it actually a global component, or is it something that could be built for your specific team? And then we work with them throughout that process if they submit it to us. But yeah, we found that that's been pretty helpful for answering some of the questions up front before we get too far down the line with the components.
Yeah. And sorry, and to like touch on like we do have everything in one file right now. We have thought about splitting that up into multiple files, having like a foundations where it includes colors and icons and such that might be used across different products, separating that out to create like the mobile system. Right now it is all in one file. It's big, but it doesn't slow down. We're constantly trying to maintain it so it doesn't slow down. We do find that some of our larger components can be a bit intense to maintain, like the input that has over 750 variants, which is like, I don't know if that's a good thing. It's just what it is. So we're trying to figure out how do we like actually maintain that. And as Figma releases new features like interactive components, how do we build that into something like that? I don't know that we can. We need to maybe rebuild it. It's already been rebuilt like twice. So yeah, it's just a matter of like going with the flow, like as Figma releases new things, updating that. And I think in like how that works in like maintaining the doc site as well is that when Figma does release something new, and we've created a video on how to use a component in Figma, and then we update the component in Figma, we then have to update the component Loom video on how to use it for the doc site. So it is a lot of maintenance and change, but that's the nature of a design system, and I enjoy that challenge.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that, because Thomas did ask how you dealt with performance in a single file. So thank you for pre-answering. I think we have a couple more design related questions, like contribute. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of it is done in Figma and in code, and like you said, you kind of work with the teams of like, should this be a component or not? And I just kind of, again, this is kind of something that I kind of highlight as well when you're designing components, is how do you have those discussions so that kind of accessibility is included, whether or not like they self-serve that creation process or that you're part of that creation process. How do you bring that into the component?
Yeah, there's a lot of areas of accessibility that we're thinking about. I do a lot of the component building in Figma and work with one of our engineers to do a lot of the component building, like translating that to code so that he builds it there. He's very, very knowledgeable about different accessibility as far as it relates to code. And I try to continue to learn how we can make things accessible. I am partially colorblind, so it like gives me this lens of especially when it comes to color contrast, which is a big one that we can build into the designs themselves. I'm constantly trying to think of like, how might somebody else experience this thing, whether it is about color contrast that it's easier for me to think about and see, or it's about tap target, someone that maybe has tremors or Parkinson's, that it's really hard to tap something. So we're thinking about tap targets. We're thinking about keyboard users, as somebody who maybe uses a screen reader. And so just always trying to think of how different people use the components in the product. And so we build that into our process. We have accessibility reviews. Once it moves into engineering, they do a bit of an accessibility requirement learning. So learning like, how do other people build in accessibility to this component? How does like WCAG require accessibility for this type of thing? And so we that is a really, really important part of our process, and we build that into both the design part and the engineering part.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, because I know as like your product is a very dashboard experience for people, and so trying to make sure that you have that tap area and very accessible, it's very considerate again for all your users. So thank you. As much as I want to dive further into your design files, I want to use all your suggestions. One of the things that I guess you have all these connections for communications. And so what are some of the things that really help drive more adoption? Or is there a continuing drive to get more adoption within your organization? Or do you feel that like you kind of, everybody is chipped in, is ready to go and use it?
I think that there's always, it's something we're always going to be working on. The company is going to continue to grow. They're growing fast as it is. So every time somebody new starts, we have to kind of do that evangelism of the system again. But one of the things that we focused on early on when I joined was branding the design system. I think one of the biggest challenges was that there was, if you talk to 10 people, there would probably be 10 different answers on like when you said what's the UI kit or the component library, if they were talking about Figma or code. So branding it and having a central source that people can go to, which is our doc site, was really critical. And so that's really helped change the conversation. People can just point to Workbench and they know how to get there. There's a lot of links to it. So that's really been helpful for us for helping people understand like we have a system and helping them find the system. But I think onboarding is a big part of it, and just making sure that we're continuing with our communication rituals, like Derek's outreach. We reach out on Mondays with kind of the system updates, so people know where and when to find that information, as well as having that available on the website.
And I think, like, to add to all of that is, I think it really comes down to the relationships that you build and the communication there. Being present in design critiques or code reviews, and just making sure that people always know that you're available to work through something. If you show them, like, hey, there's no ego here, we're not trying to like block you from doing something, please help us know like how we can improve something for you. Let's pair and talk through like what you're using. We can work through like the UX of it, to think about different components. I think a challenge that we have, that I think a lot of people probably have in design systems, is you want to create this like guidance to use something so that you have a cohesive, accessible, consistent product. But you also want to enable designers to feel free to explore. They're really, really good at that. We want to make things unique. We want to make things have our own touch, but we also want to align with the design system to make sure that accessibility and those things are considered. So it's just a matter of being present, being available, and letting them know that, like, hey, we're trying our best. Here's the direction we're going in it, and why. It helps a lot to explain why we've made a decision.
Yeah, and Derek, I think you touched on an important point, like about ego, and in like designers want to build stuff that might not be doable through the design system. So how are some of those conversations like in Gusto? Like I've experienced some hard conversations when our system doesn't support something, and like marketing wants to build something completely different to what the brand is. Does that happen at all at Gusto, and do you face those challenges at all?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we find a lot through these pairing sessions and critiques that people are trying to explore these new ways of doing something. And a lot of times we can come back to our principles. I think if you define these principles, either as a design org, a company, or a design systems team, that you can fall back on those. Like, let's create cohesion across the product. Let's make sure that everything is accessible. And a lot of times people, when they're, there are designers, of course, who are thinking accessibility first, and there are some who might not be, and that's okay. It's a matter of just like continuing to educate and help them understand that, like, hey, we need to use this component because it is built for that. That may be a custom thing that you might need, but let's then focus on, like, how do we build accessibility into that, and how might it find its way into the system? Or let's think about like how it's going to be used across other teams. From design systems perspective, we have a unique lens of seeing how a lot of different people and teams are implementing things. And a lot of times product teams are very focused on their product. So we try to just like provide that transparency into the other parts.
Yeah, and I think it helps also to kind of point to common interaction patterns that we have created, for displaying data in like tables or interacting with forms and things like that. That usually helps help us keep the same consistency, and then we can kind of build on that if we want to have a new experience, a new creative approach.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Ben. I'm going to touch a bit on like metrics and numbers and dashboards because I love that stuff. One thing I really want to know is, as a PM, when I was building the system, there was a constant like demand of like, hey, how successful is your system? Or like, how do you continuously show that, the demand is increasing, the adoption is increasing? So how do you leverage data to support some of those conversations?
Yeah, I think for us, it's an evolving way of doing that. We do have both qualitative and quantitative metrics. I think like for us, the qualitative ones are pretty easy. We can send surveys or do NPS surveys with the team, or get feedback generally how the system, how they're using the system, and understand that, and a lot of conversations, things like that. And then having the feedback module on the website, of course, helps us collect that information. But having the dashboard, that sort of was born out of having all these different data sources, and like people asking the same questions. Trying to understand like what is the health of the system, like how are people adopting components, and are people visiting the site? What are they doing? So with that, we're kind of aggregating everything into this dashboard. Right now, we're using Google Data Studio just because we're using the Google products in the organization. So we're able to use like import data into Google spreadsheets and then kind of update it as needed. In some cases, we can just directly pull in the data. But it's really helpful for like pulling in like Google Analytics insights. We can kind of highlight certain metrics. And then we use Datadog. We have some scripts that kind of run in the background and collect like how our new components are working versus kind of the legacy component library, and seeing the adoption, how that's changing over a period of time. And then with Full Story, which kind of allows us to have like anonymous sessions that we're able to record, we're able to find some insights in there beyond just watching people like use the site and navigate between pages. We're able to see like, are they clicking on the view code button? Are they interacting with the code examples? Are they clicking on like the anchor links so they can share that on other areas? So we're able to kind of see how that's happening, and we're able to see when it's not. And it also helps us find any like performance issues with the website. So we love kind of tracking that. And then Derek was also working previously with Figma's design system metrics. As we rolled out our new component library, I think it was in maybe January, Derek. And one of the things was we had the old library, so we wanted to make sure that in Figma we were tracking like people using the new components as we deprecated the old ones. And so we had like we had a page that was temporary in the dashboard that was kind of tracking that as that happened, and then we kind of got rid of that page once it was irrelevant. But yeah, it was really helpful to kind of see that.
That is super cool. I really like how you're even tracking like how folks are interacting with the documentation site, because typically we would do that for like Gusto's site, but you're doing that for the documentation side too. So I think that's really cool, because you're really using data to drive sort of what you want to focus on and sort of what's next. So really cool stuff. I think I'll go on to the next question, which is, what is one thing that you are the most proud since you started working on Workbench? We'll start with you, Ben.
Well, so I've been in Gusto for about a year and a half now, and I think that just seeing I guess people's view of the design system shift over time has been really rewarding. When I started, I think I mentioned earlier, like there was a lot of questions over like people weren't sure about terminology and the name of things. So being able to create a system, brand it, and then drive people to use that single resource for both designer and engineering documentation has been really great. And just to see people being really excited about it, I think that we had a lot of work to do to build trust and establish that, and all those efforts of like communication, transparency, and branding really helped us with that. So it's great to kind of see that now in place.
Yeah, and I think for me, I joined just over a year ago, and my main product when I started, or like after onboarding, was rebuilding the whole Figma asset library. And so I'm really proud of recreating that, building that from essentially scratch, and all the people that use it now. And I think something that I'm really thankful for too is just the ability to like build the relationships with designers, to be able to build in the trust, like Ben said. That people know they can come to you and ask questions and not feel like you're a blocker. I think that's really rewarding.
Thank you. That's something that I'm working really hard on, because at first when you're kind of reaching out like, hi, I work on the design system, how can I help you? But they're just like, I don't know yet. I don't really need your help yet. So we'll work on that. So I really like that. Again, it's the growth of yourself in the design system. And so my next question is really like, what are some things that Workbench is going to be working on in the next 3 months, 6 months? What's in the future for Workbench?
I think from and thinking about it from like the design asset side, always evolving the Figma library, maybe rebuilding those inputs. But I think like as we mentioned earlier that we're kind of reaching that like parity with our component, our legacy library, and building a lot of new components to kind of reach like where we see ourselves in our entire component library. Like we're getting there. And so I think wrapping up some of those in the next bit, and then moving on to thinking more about patterns and layouts and templates, and providing those as tools for people to use to build their mockups.
Yeah, exactly. I think that we've been focused, using some atomic design terms. We've been focused on the atoms and molecules, and now we're getting to the point where we're going to be building the organisms, which for us will be patterns and templates. So, we have a lot of that documented or designed. We just need to add it to the documentation website and find ways to educate the team on it. So I think we found like some of the things we've already done, like our anatomy diagrams, have been really helpful, creating videos. And we know that there's going to be a lot of different experiences across the product, since there's a lot of different features. So breaking those down into smaller chunks first, and then going into the larger template route once we feel comfortable with that and the team's adopting it.
Thank you. So I think people know what's up ahead for Gusto. They know what you can learn on it. Is there? You shared the link for where Workbench is. What are something that you want to share with our audience today about Gusto and your team? And of course, I heard you're hiring, so let them know.
Yeah, we're hiring. Thankfully, we found some great people, hopefully to join soon. But yeah, you can follow us on Twitter and see when we have availability, and we'll post those there. I think for me, what I'd love to share is like we're here on this like pedestal, like teaching or like sharing our knowledge, but really like we're just learning. We don't know the right answers. We're trying to figure it out. So for everyone working on design systems, just continue to learn and figure it out, and share what you know. I don't feel like I got to a point where now I feel able to share what I know. I just started sharing what I knew, and then Donna and people reach out. It's like, will you share that with some people? Sure. So like as you're learning, share it with people. You know enough to do that wherever you are in your process.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think that for us, that's important. We're trying to be as transparent as we can as we build the site. So, we're still working on it. We're not like, wouldn't say it's a finished product. I mean, the design system will never be finished, but the Workbench site itself is still very much a work in progress. And we're, changing layouts and adding features like every week. So, we're happy it's in the public space and it's not like password protected. And, we're going to continue learning and adding our learnings to the site.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Ben and Derek. That's the end of the panel questionnaire, but we definitely have a bunch of questions from the audience. So we're going to move there. We'll spend about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes based on how the questions are going, and then sort of wrap up. I do request the audience, if you do have questions, I know a bunch of you have asked them on YouTube. Hopefully our folks at the back end are moving them into Slido, but there is a vote feature in Slido. So please get into Slido. We'll post the link again and start voting, and we'll just go top to bottom. So I'm going to kick it off with the first question from Darian, which is, how do you determine which components make it to the design system? Do you have a checklist or a criteria? What about one-off design patterns?
Yeah. So we kind of measure this against some different goals from the business. So when somebody's working on something that we feel should be a new component, so some of the reasons that we might think that is that it is highly reusable. It is something that maybe relates to a component that we might acknowledge from like another design system, or is like a very standard HTML element. We'll also then look at how might this be used across the product. Might many teams use it, making it more reusable? And then we'll measure that again against like business goals of like what are the type of customers we're we're prioritizing like features for different features we're prioritizing right now. So that'll help us to know like how should we prioritize the components that we're going to build.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really helpful. You have a nice way to prioritize. So you're thinking about the longevity for your system, but also thinking about your customers and users, which is great. Cool. I'll go on to the next question from Riani. Was there any existing system when you started? If so, did you perform some type of audit, and how? So we know there was an existing system, but I guess you'll answer the audit part.
Yeah. So there was, I think, when I joined, the company had launched a major rebrand, I think probably about 6 months before. So in that work, if you've ever gone through a large rebrand, you know that things are very rushed at the end. Like, you start with great intentions, and but a lot of times you have to work really fast. So what we had was kind of a misalignment between what our designers were using in Figma and the components. There was a brand new component library, mostly because there's so many engineers in the organization that they put together kind of the basis for this library. And then on the design side, when they were trying to keep up, and there wasn't really a lot of central practice like focused on like keeping things in parity. So it was just people contributing throughout the company. So a lot of it was kind of auditing what those differences were for us. Making sure that we could get to parity, and we could have similar naming, have the exact same components, similar functionality and interactions between both the libraries.
Thank you. I think a lot of audience questions were also answered again through the presentation or through the answers that you've already given. I'm trying to find one now, and it's okay. So what is your take on design tokens? Are you using them? And if not, are you planning on using them in the future? That one.
Our opinion is love them. And yeah, so that was one of the first things that I worked on when I joined. There was already tokens existing in I guess the format just of like a shared SAS file across the company. But what we've worked on is setting up a repo for engineers. We're using Style Dictionary, and we're able to ship in a variety of formats. And right now, we have our colors, our typography, spacing in tokens, and we're still working on rolling that out to some parts of the app, but we have them synced up, and we're able to update them as the changes happen within Figma, so that they're updated in code, and we're working on pulling them into some of the older parts of the app that are still using the static SAS variables, just so we're staying consistent.
Yep. Is that something just like your team is using, or is that available to all your consumers?
Yeah, so it's the consumers. It's happening in the background. It's like built into the components. So there are parts of our products that are still might be using some of the legacy components or have some custom configurations. So they're not using those yet, but they're still using the values. We've just updated them manually, but there's just some technical constraints there that are preventing that. But our goal is to move 100% into that. And we've also built some workflows where we could export from Figma into basically to JSON, and then use Style Dictionary so that it goes to our components. So we're continually want to improve that process and make that a little bit easier. It's very manual and kind of something we built as a prototype early on.
Thanks for your answer, Ben. The next question, also from Darian, which is now the top voted question, is how do you know when a component is done and ready to be published into the design system?
Yeah, we have a process that we go through. It starts with making sure ensuring that we should do a component to add it to our list. It goes through a design proposal, which is typically understanding what is the problem we're solving, where might this thing be used across the product. We do an internal and external audit, and then we start to explore through the design. And then we'll move into doing some research if needed. If it's a larger component, we'll do some user research. So we work with our research team to put that together. Doing research on a component is very different than doing research on a feature or a page or a flow. So it's a bit of a challenge, but I think it's pretty fun. We use user testing for that, and we usually do unmoderated tests. So we kind of go, this is kind of our checklist of what we go through. And then we move into engineering. And we first start with like, what are our accessibility requirements that we need to meet for this type of component? We build the API, and then we start to work on some documentation. Throughout this process of making it sound a lot faster than it is, there's a lot of iteration and learning and redoing. But we move into documentation. And once we have all of that done and everything's ready to go, both in Figma and the React library and on documentation, then we'll do a release plan. And so we have to make sure that all these things are checked, and then we'll release it and we'll announce it to our team. We'll add it to the doc site, and it will be a published component.
Awesome. And do you actually have a checklist that you go through, like a component checklist, or is it just things that you have in mind?
Not a physical checklist. We did make one in Airtable at one point, but it's just another thing to use and maintain. And we just found that it was easier to like actually just update the status, talk about it each week, multiple times a week, of like, where are we with this thing? So yeah.
Awesome. We've also recently rolled out some experience principles for the organization. So we're working on ways to integrate that into that sort of like a checklist. And we're thinking about like making some FigJam widgets or Figma plugins to basically help with that, so we can go through to make sure that whatever components we're doing is still in line with what we're doing as a business.
Cool. Very nice.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Donna.
No. So there's a question that's kind of related. Again, like you said, that you don't really have a checklist, but you kind of track the progress during meetings. And so there's a question here, an anonymous question. How do you track the work effort across design and development when creating components? Do you use Jira or something else? This meeting.
Is I guess for some clarification, is it about like how much time we've put into something?
Yeah, I believe like the way I read this is more on the operation side. Like, how do you track things as it moves from one phase to the other? Do you use Jira, or do you use another tool for that?
Yeah, we were using Jira. We do also look at, we don't really track how much time we spend on something, but we look at like how much general time do we normally spend on different sized components. Something like a button versus a table would follow a similar process, but the process steps would take longer. So we track all of that, and what step is it in the process, all through Airtable. So similar to what I showed in the presentation, we have like a line for design. Is design blocked? Is it in the backlog? Is it up next? Is it in progress, or is it done? And then we have the same thing for engineering and docs as well. And so when all of those have reached done, then we move it into releasing.
Yeah, and we've been able to really utilize Airtable with that. We like the table that has like, I think 40 something columns at this point. So we're able to use that to track like everything from a new component to a new process we're working on. And we have some formulas we've created to kind of read those statuses, so we can create like other views within Airtable to see where the component's at. We actually use those on the website too, to show the component status and like updates. So it's been really helpful for us to have that kind of kitchen sink approach with Airtable.
Thank you so much. Okay, so everyone's very curious about this one Figma file. We have a question from another anonymous. So what's the driver to have all your components in one Figma file? What has been the pros and cons of having it?
Yeah, we also published an article about our process and creating all of this on Medium on the Gusto Design blog. Someone had a comment that was like, don't do that. Like, put it in separate files. I think, again, ultimately it's like, meet your people where they are at the time that they are. Maybe our long-term goal is to have separate files so that we have like a foundations file that we can feed into a web components and like a mobile components. file that we can then also create patterns files or for different products. But when we recreated our Figma file, we were already adding a lot of new things into it to introduce to our designers. We added variants, we added auto layout, and we added parity with what engineers had. So it was a lot of new stuff for the designers to understand and consume. And what we wanted to prioritize was those things, which is what they asked for. One of the things when I joined, again, learning and building the relationships with them, was I met with every single one to understand what are the pain points and frustrations with the current Figma library. What are things that you're looking for that you'd like to see? And it was a lot about new Figma features, variants, auto layout, parity with engineering. It wasn't separating the files. And so though that might be a goal for us, what we didn't want to do is introduce a lot of different new things. Their legacy file was just one file. So what we wanted to do was let's keep that for now, though we have a long-term goal to maybe split them up based on how the system and the company changes. But for now, let's only introduce some change so that we're not just throwing them for a loop. It's really important to us that we're not just building things and saying, okay, here, go use it, but that we understand how they're using it and what they're really looking for.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, I really throughout the presentation, you folks have been very articulate about, people over process and just, being there and learning for your users to build better, for your customers, which is fantastic. So we'll do 2 more questions. I'm actually going to skip some of the Figma questions because we've been talking about a lot of Figma. 1 second.
People can always reach out afterwards and
yeah,
ask Figma questions or such.
Cool. As a large systems team of 9 people coming up soon, how do you all speak in one voice and make sure you don't contradict each other?
Yeah, this is certainly a challenge. I think maybe I'll talk a little bit to this and give it over to you, Ben. I think for me, it comes back to our principles, making sure we have defined principles that what is most important to us. Is it that we're on the same page? Is it accessibility? Is it performance, which has to do with accessibility? Is it innovation or aligning with the brand? Whatever these principles might be, maybe help us when we're trying to make decisions. We might be conflicting to fall back on those. Ben, maybe you have something too.
Yeah, I think that also just having consistent communication rituals on the team is really important. Just so we have predictability around when do announcements happen, what format, if we're using Slack, what channels do they go out in, and then we have a newsletter, so we have an established format for that. We try to keep things brief and then send people to the the website if there's more information there. So we try to keep that voice consistent so that it's you're seeing something from design systems that feels predictable. We also partner with our content team, and that's something that's relatively new, but we've been trying to work on consistency on copy and the voice, and making sure that the way we're the examples we're providing components like that all have consistency and are following the brand guidelines too. So there's a variety of ways.
Great. Thanks for sharing. Definitely a very important aspect. Everyone talking the same stuff. All right, on to our last question. I know we have a bunch of other questions, so if we didn't get to your question, let's do that on Twitter. You can follow Ben and Derek and ask them there, and they'll be happy to respond. At least I think they will be. The last one is, besides adoption, what are some other KPIs do you use to justify business decision making, and the need to hire more people within your team?
Yeah, I think Derek, you might be able to speak to this a little bit too, but I think that one of the things is just figuring out if we have specific roles that we're looking for. We're not just going to hire designers that have the same skill set. If we find people that have very specific skill sets that we need on the team, then that usually helps. Some of the roles we've hired for this year are unique and things that we hadn't really planned for at the beginning of the year. And just very unique cases from different experiences that they bring to the team. So that's been really helpful. But I think just being able to see that we're able to build the components, and now we're gonna need some help with migrations and continuing that work, and continuing to be able to support the teams that are consumers, especially on the engineering side, being able to answer questions and help partner with those teams to integrate components is really important. So that helps us justify a lot of on the engineering side as well.
Yeah, I think that's really it. We all love to like focus on different things. Like Ben focuses a lot on the documentation. I focus a lot on the Figma and the components, and there's a lot of opportunity for new folks to focus on other things, as there are always many needs in the design system.
All right. I think that's a wrap from a questions and answers perspective. I'll hand it back to Enrico.
Thank you, Derek and Ben, for being our lovely guests today. And I'm going to wrap us all up today. So thank you, everyone, for your questions in the audience. Let's all say goodbye to Derek and Ben until next time. And let's talk a little bit about the rest of us here at Design Systems Community. Thank you for joining our meetup. Please leave your feedback. If you have an iPhone, hold up your camera. If you have an Android phone, try to get Google Lens or type in the URL there. I'll add it to the YouTube comments now. Please leave your feedback. Let us know if you liked today's meetup. If you joined us on meetup.com, you can also comment there. You can find us anywhere: Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and even email. So if you want to ask questions for Derek or even us, find us anywhere. We'll listen and we'll try our best to respond to you. And that is all. So everybody, have a good rest of your year and enjoy December.
Thank you.